Most of my videos admittedly focus on pretty depressing media, which makes sense considering the fact that I'm a depressed piece of shit, so stories about depressed pieces of shit will obviously appeal to me. Today though, I want to shift gears for a bit by talking about something I genuinely have a burning passion for: Furyo manga. Furyo manga is not exactly the most popular genre out there, and I'm sure that a lot of you watching this video may not even be familiar with it at all, so I wanna start off by explaining what it's all about. The word Furyo directly translated means no good, defective, but it's also commonly used to describe Japanese delinquents. The term Furyo Shonan pretty much meaning bad boys, so you've guessed it, Furyo manga focuses on telling stories about delinquents. And I know you may be thinking that it's pretty toxic to create stories idolizing delinquency, but that's not exactly true. In English, we pretty much only have the word delinquent to refer to these troubled teens that misbehave, but in Japan, especially in the 70s when the Furyo phenomenon really became a thing, there was actually a big distinction to make between the words Furyo and Hiko. Furyos are delinquents that get into fights and steal, usually to protect themselves and their friends. However, things like bullying, mugging, drug dealing, and pretty much most of the very toxic stuff was usually associated with Hiko. While Hiko youth were seen as fundamentally depraved, Furyo youth were understood to be fundamentally good. Furyo youth were characterized as being strong fighters who were admired by their peers and who had youthful hearts, pure minds, and vivid eyes. The term Furyo itself carried some attractive connotations. So these stories are not idolizing toxic behavior, most of them actually teach very positive life lessons, more on that later. I think the most mainstream character I can think of to help you understand the concept is Yusuke from Yu Yu Hakusho. He's a pretty by-the-book, stereotypical Furyo character, at the start of the story anyway. He gets into fights, cuts classes, smokes, and is feared by a lot of his classmates, but he's ultimately a very kind person with a caring nature. Now, I want to address the fact that I pretty much have a PhD in Furyo manga, but I know next to nothing about Furyo anime, and that's in part because they're really scarce to begin with, but also because it really saddens me to say it, but the genre is way past its prime in terms of popularity. It really was a 80s, 90s thing, and this is not limited to anime. I remember seeing this Vice documentary where a Bosozoku was talking about how Furyo culture was dying nowadays, and that fucking sucks, dude. Unless it flew under my radar, I don't think any Furyo anime came out in the past 10 years. The very last one I can think of is Beelzebub, which aired in 2011, but that's not even really a full-fledged Furyo anime. And can that be explained by the fact that Japan is a very formal society that probably doesn't want to shed light on stories showcasing outcasts that strive to break out of its mold? Or is it just that people lost interest in it over time? I don't know, I'm not nearly qualified enough to answer this question. What I can say though is that thankfully Furyo manga is still going strong. Right now some pretty solid series like Out and Tokyo Revengers are still getting updated regularly, so I don't think the genre is in danger of dying anytime soon. What I'd like to say though, if I can get slightly political I guess for a bit, is that I don't think showing adolescents media focusing on delinquents will necessarily be a bad thing for their development. Because what needs to be understood is that yes, Furyo manga presents these prideful delinquents that get into fights, skip classes and everything, but that's only the surface layer, and what you'll find in most of these stories are lessons of camaraderie, of learning how important relationships are and how we can support each other when we're in a bad spot, of kindness, most characters in these stories have gone through a lot of bad shit so they're all very kind people, and finally, of critical thinking. These characters can't seem to fit into society's mold, so they're trying to find their own path to live a fulfilling life. And you may say, oh, troubled teens wouldn't even watch anime in the first place, so your point is invalid, but that's just wrong. Naruto, for example, is very popular with minorities because they can see the hardships they have to face every day in Naruto's ostracization from Konoha. In France in particular, GTO is insanely popular and ingrained within street culture. It's referenced a lot in rap, and this anime is pretty much the best example to prove my point. When people idolize Onizuka, it's not because he's a badass ex-delinquent that can easily beat most people's asses, even though that's part of it. But it's rather because of how human he is despite of that. It's more like, even though he's an ex-delinquent that had to deal with a shit ton of hardships, he still managed to become a very kind and respectable person, and that's what's so inspiring about him. Maybe I'm biased and this is too much, but I genuinely believe that anyone that watches or reads GTO becomes a better human being, because it teaches so many valuable life lessons of acceptance, kindness, and you know, everything I just talked about. Near the start of the story, when Onizuka is having a job interview to become a teacher, some ex-students that got expelled come to cause a ruckus, and the vice principal keeps calling them trash, scum, good for nothing, and Onizuka loses patience and just fucking yoinks him on the ground. And I think that this one scene did more good for a lot of troubled teens than any other piece of media did.
どうしたの？うまくいかなかったの？面接。
わかる？やっぱ俺みてえなクズは教師になんかなれねえのかね。
あら、若いのに自分をクズだなんて言うもんじゃありませんよ。
だってよ、ガキの頃から先行とかにバカだのクズだの言われてりゃそうなのかなって思っちまうぜ普通。どうして先行ってみんななのかな。そりゃ確かに俺はバカだし喧嘩っ早いし教師に向いてねえかもしんねえけど、でも俺が先行だったら絶対しねえぜ。てめえの教え子クズ呼ばわりするような真似はよ。
Okay, I'm done being political. I think there's two main reasons why I love Furyo manga so much. The first one being that to me it's the purest form of shonen out there. There's no superpower, no gimmick, no saving the world, no nothing. It's just regular people beating the shit out of each other to protect what's important for them. And I think that's beautiful. Nothing makes my blood boil like Furyo manga did. The second and main one is this absolute sense of freedom that emanates from these stories. Surprisingly, Furyo manga kinda has the same effect as Iyashikei, healing anime, on my brain. I don't think anyone will be shocked if I say that our generation is a pretty anxious one. We're all stressed out of our minds about a myriad of things between managing relationships, budgets, getting good grades to get a good job to secure our future, staying healthy. There's just a lot of stressing factors out there, and all of this can get very overwhelming for a lot of people, so you see articles everywhere about the scary rise of anxiety rates throughout the world in today's youth. And characters in these stories often have pretty shitty lives and little to no prospect for the future, but they always try to make the most out of what they have and make it a point to cherish living in the moment. And I just find that very inspiring. I'm constantly trying to implement this mentality more into my daily life because I think it's a very healthy way to live your life. Now, just in case I haven't made it clear by now, the point of this video is pretty much just to get people into Furyo manga. It's pretty much Furyo manga propaganda, so I'm gonna spend the rest of it introducing some of my favorite series in the genre, while making an effort to talk about radically different stories to not sound like a broken record. Starting off with one of the founders' classic, most important title of Furyo manga, Shonan Junai Gumi, also known as Young GTO. I feel like I'm starting to get annoying by talking about GTO so much in every video, but it's actually very relevant here, like please give me the benefit of the doubt. I am not obsessed. I am just slightly obsessed. So Shonan Junai Gumi is the prequel to GTO, even though GTO is technically the sequel since Shonan Junai Gumi was published before, but most people know the franchise because of GTO, so it's kinda like the main one. Okay, that was pretty confusing. Basically all you need to know is that it happens fuck Young GTO happens before GTO, which makes sense considering the fact that it's called Young GTO. Can you tell I'm going off script? Because I'm making no sense. Yes. Shall I cut that in the video? Probably. Am I gonna? Hopefully? Anyway, the story focuses on Onizuka's high school days, back when he and his best friend Ryuji were known as the Onibaku, the duo that reigned over Shonan, which is the region they live in. And I'm gonna say straight up that, to no one's surprise, even though there are plenty of very cool fights, the show stealer is easily just Onizuka himself. Dude, this character is the literal backbone of Toru Fujisawa's whole career, and that's no coincidence. Onizuka is the most likable, charismatic character out there, and it all started here. Even though not really, because there's a manga called Bad Company that got published after Young GTO, focusing on Onizuka's middle school days. But I think I'm gonna stop talking about all these spin-offs because I'm starting to get very confusing for no reason, so I'm gonna stop now. In this manga, Onizuka spends most of the story helping out others elevate themselves, so it feels very natural for him to become a teacher in GTO. Even as a teenager, he's shown to have this incredible level of maturity and care for the people around him, and I'd like to exemplify that by talking about one of my favorite arcs from Young GTO that really stuck with me and made dumb teenager me way more open-minded. This arc starts at chapter 244, when Onizuka meets a very cute girl and things seem to go well for once, because we're 244 chapters in and he's still single. I'm gonna cut to the chase. Once both him and the girl start to ease into a relationship, she admits that she's a trans woman, and while he's rightfully shocked at first, he quickly gets over it and is ready to move to Tokyo to live with her because, man or woman, he's really in love with her, and at the end of the day, whoever you fall in love with is the right one for you. And of course she ends up leaving for Tokyo without him because the story does need to continue, but I think that having such a big role model like Onizuka openly tell the readers that it's okay to love whoever the fuck you want or be whoever the fuck you want is really really cool, especially considering the fact that Young GTO was published back in 1990 in Japan, which is known to be pretty behind times with this subject. Now, I'm making it sound like it's this very mature, deep story, and it is in a lot of ways, but if I leave it at that, I feel like it'd be false advertisement, because let's not forget that the main goal for Onizuka in Young GTO is to lose his virginity, so yeah, there are very serious moments, but it's also filled with crude comedy and just chill vibes, where we follow Onizuka's daily life. And that's not a deterrent, the comedy is probably the biggest strength of the GTO franchise. Everybody that hasn't seen GTO just thinks it's this very funny haha anime, without all the very fucking cool life lessons behind it, but you know, GTO is really well known for its comedy, so I mean, you get a lot of it in Young GTO. Honestly, I could probably talk your ear off all day about GTO, but I'll stop there for now because there's a lot of other manga I need to spend time on, but keep in mind that I'd have no reason to be so obsessed with this franchise if it wasn't pretty fucking great. Moving on, this next one may seem out of place because it's not a manga, it's a live action movie, but I can't realistically make a video on Furyō manga without talking about the title that got me into the genre in the first place, Crow Zero by legendary director Takeshi Miike. The movie is a spin-off of the Crows manga by Takahashi Hiroshi, who is arguably the most important author in Furyō manga. He's made countless great ones and I'm actually gonna talk about one of them in a bit. Before I say anything else though, I need to admit that I'm gonna throw all objectivity out of the window while I'm talking about this movie because I have an insane amount of nostalgia for it, so take what I say with a grain of salt. So it's a really straightforward, simple story. Genji Takiya, the main character, just transferred to Suzuran High, and he immediately wants to become the top dog of the school, so he goes around beating people up, making friends and beating more people up. Of course it's a bit more complicated than that, the movie actually has a pretty interesting story, but that's pretty much all you have to know to decide if you want to watch it or not. Now, your skin may have crawled when you heard the words live action adaptation, which is understandable considering what we usually get, but you're in safe hands here. Movie's great, Takeshi Miike is great, I'm totally biased. I'd really like to act cool and call it a guilty pleasure, but it's really not, it's just a fucking pleasure, dude. Yeah, it's kinda cheesy and a bit too anime for real life actors, but it just works way too well for me to pretend like I don't love it. Dude, if you've seen the movie, that one scene where they walk towards the final battle in the rain, it's like, oh shit, dude! Yo, I get goosebumps every time. Like, I was impressed as a 12 years old, and I still am now, baby. Does it mean I haven't evolved as a human being and I'm still an edgy teenager? Probably. But hopefully not. As I mentioned earlier, Crow Zero is a spin-off of the Crows manga, but it itself received its own spin-offs in manga form, going full circle. I'm mentioning this because one of those, Crow Zero 2, was made by Hirakawa Tetsuhiro, the author of the next manga I want to talk about, so hey, that's a pretty seamless transition if I may say so myself. Moving on, I want to talk about a manga that I believe to pretty much be at the peak of classic bread and butter Furyo manga, Clover. Clover, dude, I've read this manga religiously every week for so many fucking years. There isn't much to say about it because, as I've said, I think that its main strength is that it's probably the best classic following the formula Furyo manga. Great fights, great art, great humor, amazing characters that are developed over 400 chapters. It's just a great time that encapsulates the full Furyo manga experience. I know I'm going over it very quickly, so I may not be doing the best job selling it to you, but it's really great, just please check it out. Next up is Bakuon Rettou, and I'm gonna be honest, a big part of why I decided to make this video in the first place is because I wanted an excuse to talk about this manga, but to effectively do that, I needed you to have an at least basic understanding of Furyo manga. Most of them have what's called the Shonan spirit. Characters want to get stronger, they get into fights, make friends, foes become allies, everyone ultimately has a good nature, and it's all pretty lighthearted at the end of the day. They paint this idealistic view of the world, and I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I love shonen, most of us come to anime for escapism, and that's totally fine. But I love Bakuon Rettou exactly because it's not that. While most Furyo manga are very idealistic in their nature, Bakuon Rettou is very realistic. It's a seinen in which we follow a kid called Takeshi Kaze as he tries to figure out who he is, what he wants to be, and his place in society. I don't want to say too much because I really hope you'll read it, but he quickly ends up becoming a bosozoku, which is a step above Furyo and a step below Yakuza. Basically a gangster, and this story is less about becoming the strongest around. The main character isn't really good at fighting, but it's more about portraying the actual life of these people and what being a bosozoku implies for you, your family, your relationships, your future, etc. And what I really like about this manga is that since it's a seinen, you could think that it fall into the trap of trying very hard to be dark and mature by showcasing all these messed up things in line with those shitty "don't do drugs kids" where the guy smokes weed once and becomes a fucking degenerate, but it doesn't. Yeah, there's some pretty dark stuff happening. Some of Takeshi's friends become drug addicts, some of them die in bike crashes, and you know, a whole plethora of sad, bad things, because living this kind of lifestyle does imply the possibility of hardships like that happening. But the manga also focuses a lot on the good side of it. Takeshi felt out of place around his family and in school, but he finally found a place where he really felt like he belonged in the Zero Gang. It also puts a huge emphasis on this feeling of freedom I was talking about a while back. When they all gather and write together, they really feel it, and I think it's very well communicated through the amazing art you can see on screen right now. This manga really takes a more philosophical approach to what it means to be a Furyo, and it's one of my favorites. I can't recommend it enough. Please check it out. Drop by Takahashi Hiroshi, the legendary mangaka I talked about a while back, is about this Furyo manga otaku that has never really been in a fight before. He's a very average student with good grades and good etiquette, but once he enrolls into high school, he decides to dye his hair to start living his dream Furyo life. On his first day of school, he gets into a fight with his year's top dogs and pretty much gets beaten to a pulp, but in classic shonen fashion, he keeps getting back up until he manages to beat one of the guys. Impressed by his determination, the leader decides to add him to his group of friends. Now here's this manga's gimmick. Hiroshi, the main character, is just a weeb at the end of the day, so he has little to no experience in fighting. He's pretty fucking weak, so he wins fights by using cheap tricks or by outsmarting his opponents. He's kinda like Usopp from One Piece now that I think about it. He basically talks a lot of shit to get the upper hand mentally on his opponents, and that's a really fun fighting style to follow. What really stands out about this manga though is Hiroshi's mindset. He's terrified about becoming a boring normal person, and so even though he gets hurt a lot and it's a path full of hardships, he decided to make a change in his life and actually went ahead and did it, which is very admirable. He's just a very endearing character to follow. A little fun fact that I think is worth mentioning as well is that the manga received a live action adaptation back in 2009, and it's not amazing or anything, but it's very serviceable. It's a fun time, so I thought I'd mention it just in case it might interest somebody. I believe it's important for me to end the video off with Tokyo Revengers, as it's a new gen Furyo manga that's pretty much solo carrying the future of the genre right now. It's a bit more out there than most Furyo manga, but not to its detriment, it's genuinely fucking great. It's about this aimless guy in his 20s called Takemichi that works part-time at a video rental store, and that's pretty much all he has going on for himself. We very quickly come to understand that he's very disillusioned with life and he's obviously pretty depressed. One day he hears on the news that his ex-girlfriend from his middle school days died in a car accident orchestrated by the Tokyo Menji gang, the most violent gang in Tokyo. The very same day, while on his way to work, he gets pushed onto the train tracks, and the next thing he knows, he's been isekai'd back in time to his middle school self back when he was a small-time wannabe Furyo. From there, you may have guessed it, the story is gonna center around him trying to find out why his ex-girlfriend was killed, who did it, and how he'll try to prevent it by eventually joining the Tokyo Menji gang himself to elucidate this mystery. So this manga, I'll say straight up, is probably the manga I'm looking forward to reading the most every week right now. I really love it, and it's gonna be pretty hard to keep this section concise while avoiding just fanboying over it the whole time. I think at this point you understand that I may or may not like Furyo manga a lot, but I also happen to be a sucker for those going back in time stories. Erased, again, the very fucked up Umare Rukachi that I've never heard anyone talk about, but holy shit, it's very wrong. Maybe I'll talk about it someday. It's basically like Erased if the protagonist was a complete sociopath, but I'm getting off track. I basically love time travel stories as well, and since Tokyo Revengers is a mix of both, I pretty much had to like it by default. But it exceeded my expectations, and then it exceeded my already exceeded expectations by getting better and better with each chapter. Sadly, I'm gonna have to stop there for now because I'd like to avoid spoiling the story as much as possible, but you definitely should give it a try. In Tokyo Revengers, Takemichi goes back in the past to save the present, while the manga itself is presently saving the future of the genre, and I think that's pretty poetic. Hey, thank you for making it to the end. Yes, I'm still alive. I've just been really fucking lazy, dude. I don't have an excuse. Oh yeah, dude, the fucking lockdown it's not easy, bro. Oh yeah, before I end it off, I wanna say that, of course, I haven't talked about every single good Furyo manga out there, and if you're familiar with the genre, please don't be that guy that's like, I can't believe you didn't mention X manga, dude. because as I said, I tried to make a selection of pretty different titles to avoid repeating the same thing over and over again. I don't see a point in talking about every Furyo manga, people get the gist of it pretty quickly. But anyway, if you're still listening to this, thank you for watching, and please leave a like and subscribe to the Jiffy YouTube channel for biannual uploads. Fucking for the worst upload schedule on YouTube. Hey, subscribe, dude. See you in 2 years.